Public Policy Responses to Market Power, part of our lecture series on market power. In this video, we're going to discuss how we can fix the inefficiencies that come from market power, or we can fix the unfair outcomes that come from market power. And we can do this through anti-collusion regulation, anti-merger regulation, through foreign trade, or through price ceilings. And we'll also discuss the special case of natural monopolies. First, though, let me talk about cartels. A cartel, as Investopedia defines it, is, quote, a collection of independent businesses or organizations that collude in order to manipulate the price of a product or service. In other words, a bunch of firms that are supposed to be competing get together and instead decide to cooperate and set prices that would be higher than the competitive price would be. Thus, everyone reaps greater profits. So a successfully organized and enforced cartel can achieve these higher profits by agreeing between them, again, to sell at a certain price or a certain price range. And this is a kind of market organization that would lead to similar outcomes to what would happen in a monopoly. Now, cartels are illegal in the United States, and I want to show you not just like illegal like we think about for, someone might pay a fine or something. No, I want you to read the headline here: 2 freight transportation executives sentenced to prison terms for price fixing. What we get to when we see a cartel form is that people go to jail. It's not one of those where people just pay fines or get probation. The Department of Justice is big on sending people to jail if they try this kind of collusion and they get caught. So this is an example of anti-collusion regulation, making sure that firms compete in a market and don't try to cooperate to set prices. Similar to this is anti-merger regulation. You can imagine that a firm could try to buy up all the other firms in a market, and by buying up all the other firms in the market, then they would become a monopolist. Well, that is illegal, again, in the United States. And the Department of Justice has an antitrust division that's in charge of enforcing this anti-merger legislation. And then what you hear a lot of times is that for large mergers, the kind that get reported in mainstream news sources, you would see the companies seek permission from the government before they execute the merger, just to make sure that they're not committing an antitrust violation, because if they did merge and then did commit an antitrust violation, they would be liable for a lot of money in fines, and then they have to unwind all the work that they've done since the merger. So even though the anti-merger regulation is about people who have already merged, large mergers will ask for the government to review and make sure the merger is okay before they go through the merger. Another way to resolve monopolies, besides these kinds of regulations, is to allow freer foreign trade. If governments let imports compete with domestic monopolists or domestic oligopolists, that can decrease market power. And the textbook has an example of car companies. There are the big 3 car companies in the US currently, and they could behave like an oligopoly, but because we allow foreign companies to compete, there are many more firms in the car market. We can also think about banking. There used to be big restrictions on overseas banks setting up individual offices or like branch banks in the US, but that's been relaxed lately, and now we see international banks such as Banco Santander who create a lot of domestic branches in the US, and that probably lessens the market power of the traditional domestic-based banks. So with all this regulation, why are there so many monopolies? And one reason is that, as we saw in the previous video, monopolies are very profitable. So there's a lot of incentive to try to, even with all these regulations, create market power and try to consolidate that market power in a monopoly. And the textbook makes a great phrase, that's a great division of this. Monopolies are legal. If you happen to get a monopoly If your company happens to be the only company that manufactures, let's say, a vaccine, or manufactures, or is the only company that produces movies with Marvel characters, those are legally protected monopolies. And they're protected in that way because the government wants to incentivize companies to get that level of profit. And that helps companies innovate and produce the goods that they can produce. But monopolization is not legal. In other words, if a company tries some sort of anti-competitive practice, that's illegal. And pushing other firms out of business or not allowing other firms to compete is also not legal. Just recently, Google has been subject to an antitrust suit from the Department of Justice because they made a deal with Apple to be the default search provider on all iPhones. And these payments that would go to billions of dollars were payments that were meant to exclude other firms from the search market and make sure that Google kept its status as a near monopolist. In the 90s, we had several other examples of this. Microsoft trying to take over the web browser market, Intel trying to monopolize the market for computer chips. Both of these examples were also antitrust regulations were brought to bear both in the US and Europe to try to regulate these. But still, companies will try to do this because, again, the profits are so large compared to being in a competitive situation. Price ceilings are another way that we can regulate a monopolist market. Now, you remember from earlier that price ceilings in a market of perfect competition are clearly inefficient. And if they're binding, they lead to shortages in the market. But as we saw when we modeled monopolies, the monopoly market is already inefficient. We're already getting an efficiency trade-off. And the shortages are already there because the monopolist is only providing where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So if we already have a situation where there are shortages and we have inefficiencies, then why shouldn't we set a price ceiling and allow more consumer surplus than there was previously? So price ceilings are a way that the government uses to take away some of the producer surplus and make some of that into consumer surplus. And we see price ceilings a lot in the case of natural monopolies. And natural monopolies are a special case. A natural monopoly is a market that has characteristics, makes it cheapest for only one firm to operate. And that means there are large, what we call economies of scale. In other words, the larger a firm gets, the better it provides services. It's an industry where there are very, very high initial costs. Think about the costs to provide power to every house, the cost to provide internet to every house, the cost to provide natural gas to every house. These are all high costs at the start, but that once the network is in place, once that framework is in place, the marginal costs are very low, even possibly marginal costs declining as quantities sold get larger and larger. In these cases, it's more efficient to have one firm or just a couple firms. You can imagine if several different companies were trying to string electricity to every house, how confusing and how cluttered that would be. So in these cases, having one or having just a couple firms is much more efficient, but these firms will have a lot of market power. So what we see is really strong government regulation in these natural monopolies. Competition will never lower prices, so allowing foreign trade won't be helpful unless there's some sort of technological revolution. So, think about it used to be that phone lines were strung to every house, and there was no such thing as cell phones, no such thing as smartphones. So that was a natural monopoly. But in a technological revolution, now almost everyone uses cellular phones instead of landline phones. So that was a technical revolution that overcame a natural monopoly. Sometimes the government is going to provide these services directly instead of relying on a private firm to provide the services. Sometimes there will be what we call quasi-governmental organizations that will supply these goods that are served by natural monopolies. And sometimes governments will set rates. So in the case of electricity generation or electricity distribution in the Northeast, there's a company called Eversource that is in charge of most of the electricity distribution to the Northeast, but they operate with governments, state governments, setting the rates they can charge people and companies. Now, once we've talked about the inefficiency of monopolies, we talked about like regulation opportunities, I want us to step back a second and ask, are monopolies bad or good? And that's a key question that we maybe don't deal with enough when we talk about monopolies. There are arguments to make, and we've made a couple of them here, that monopolies are bad, that there's an efficiency trade-off or deadweight loss in a monopolist market. There is what we would call adverse redistribution. In other words, way more producer surplus going to people who own firms, who tend to be from the upper strata of society, and a lot less consumer surplus going to other members of the society who are in lower socioeconomic strata. And also, monopolies might want to switch resources from producing goods and innovating to acquiring more and more market power, what we would call rent seeking. So that's the argument that those are some of the arguments that monopolies are bad. But I also want to expose you to the idea that there are some arguments that monopolies are good. There is a way for monopolies to operate without deadweight loss. There is a way for monopolies to sell their goods so that it's as efficient as a market of perfect competition. Now, the way it does that is through what we call price discrimination, which is an example of the word discrimination that's not illegal. But in this world of price discrimination, there's actually no producer surplus. So it's efficient, but many people would say maybe it's not fair because their consumer surplus is zero in these cases. Also, increased profits can lead to research and development, R&D efforts into far-flung technologies. And a lot of the stuff we have today, a lot of the inventions we rely on today, were from research and development labs from monopolists. So, for instance, the phone company had a monopoly on landline phones, and their research and development developed a lot of the communications that the internet relies on. Xerox, which was the company that monopolized copiers, which were sort of an early form of printers, had enough money to fund a Palo Alto research center that came up with the mouse. So whenever you use a computer mouse, that's from a company that was a monopolist. Now, Xerox didn't really understand the value of the computer mouse, so they sold that information to Apple, who did. Also, monopolies set up an area where it's possible for creative destruction to happen. You know, I told you about the example of landline phones being replaced by cellular phones, and that's an example of the situation where monopoly was overcome by a technological revolution. Would that technological revolution have been encouraged if there wasn't a monopoly making these profits? That's a little unclear to me. So these are the arguments that maybe leaving monopolies alone are a possibility as well. So there are regulations to control the inefficiency of monopoly markets. And these regulations may encourage competition in a lot of cases, but competition is not going to help in the case of natural monopolies. Thank you.